Evening was falling over the large amusement park, bright lights flickering all around, enticing tourists and locals alike to the sparkling carousels, roaring roller coasters, and booths with treats. The noise of the crowd, the cries of excitement, music, the popping of balloons, created true chaos, yet at the same time was mesmerizing. As usual, I had come here in search of thrills, but couldn't have imagined what awaited me that evening. Finally, the long-awaited weekend had arrived, and I decided to spend it carefree, riding a couple of extreme attractions and trying the famous local hot dog that all my friends were talking about. The atmosphere was more than fitting. A warm breeze, faintly scented with cotton candy, enveloped me like a promise of something special. Wandering between ice cream stands and cotton candy vendors, I noticed people crowding around the force meter, a classic attraction with a hammer and a heavy mechanism that measures the strength of the hit. Usually in such places, the crowd likes to taunt volunteers. "Come on, show us what you're capable of." I approached closer to see who would score the highest points. At that moment, a hulking man in a t-shirt with the logo of some local football team moved away from the hammer. He tried several times but couldn't reach the top mark. The crowd cheerfully hooted, and he, embarrassed, waved and stepped aside. Then a delicate, short-statured girl stepped forward, appearing to be a college student. There was something unusual about it. Usually, such attractions attract guys wanting to show off their biceps, but she looked like a quiet bookworm in a light sundress, as if she had accidentally ended up in the park. I smirked inwardly. Something told me this attempt would fail, but her confident gaze and slight smile slightly puzzled me. When she grabbed the hammer, I felt my mouth go dry. And in the next second, the entire park seemed to quiet down. A sharp hit on the platform, and the force meter sensor shot up to the very top. A bell rang at the top of the scale announcing a record hit. People were initially stunned into silence, then an explosion of applause erupted. The girl carefully placed the hammer back, nodded to the gathered crowd, and began to walk away, but I, not noticing how it happened, blocked her path. "Hey, that was impressive!" I blurted out before I realized I was actually going to speak. She looked up at me, and I immediately noticed something special in her eyes, as if a strange glint flickered deep within her pupils. But her smile was friendly, quite normal. "Thank you," she replied. "Just luck, probably." In that moment, everything around disappeared. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat, my fingers slightly trembling with excitement. I introduced myself, and she easily responded. "My name is Anna. Nice to meet you, Jay." Usually, I'm not one to easily strike up conversations with strangers, but there was something elusive and attractive about her. We exchanged a couple of jokes, and I invited her to have a lemonade at a nearby booth. She agreed without hesitation, and we moved through the crowd in search of a free table. Passing by the glittering attractions, I occasionally watched her light steps and couldn't shake the feeling that her strength was not just a well-placed hit. And yet she seemed absolutely normal, open, friendly. We drank refreshing lemonade, chatted about how much we both liked this city. Anna mentioned that she had recently moved from another state but didn't go into details. I didn't press her, after all. It was our first meeting. What was more important was how comfortable we felt around each other. It seemed that a barely noticeable chemistry arose between us immediately. That evening, I had no idea that this mysterious girl with her unnatural physical strength and enigmatic smile would forever change my life and plunge me into a whirlpool of events that I had only read about in grim legends before. Our relationship with Anna developed rapidly, as if we had both been eagerly waiting for this meeting our entire lives. After the amusement park, We exchanged numbers and immediately arranged to meet the next day. Thus began our little summer of love. We wandered along the waterfront, went to the local cinema, tried street food in different parts of the city. Everywhere we appeared, it seemed people smiled at us subconsciously, as if sensing the romantic aura that hovered around us. However, soon I began to notice oddities. At first, they were very minor incidents. For example, we were sitting in a cafe drinking coffee when suddenly a car drove by with loud music and a sharp exhaust roar. Anna suddenly tensed, squeezed her cup so hard that the knuckles of her fingers turned white, and her eyes gleamed with some wild light. But this moment lasted no more than a second. She immediately smiled, calmed down as if nothing had happened. I thought then that she was just startled by the unexpected noise. Another time we were having a picnic in the city park, grilling burgers with my friends. Anna seemed quite cheerful but kept trying to stay in the shade, as if the sun bothered her. And when someone asked her to take a group photo, she politely declined, saying she didn't like how she looks in pictures. My friends exchanged glances but didn't give it much importance. However, I felt a slight unease for the first time. A little later, another quirk appeared. Anna avoided looking at her reflection in windows and mirrored surfaces. As soon as she noticed a mirror or something reflecting her image nearby, she tensed up, immediately turned away, and diligently changed the topic of conversation. If I tried to jokingly ask if she was afraid of ghosts, she would just smile somewhat stiffly and quickly steer the conversation elsewhere. But perhaps the most unexpected was related to her food preferences. She almost always ordered meat dishes, and in large quantities. Even if it was a salad, it had to have pieces of steak. One day we were having dinner at a steakhouse, and I was amazed at how greedily and with obvious pleasure she ate a perfectly medium rare steak. I personally liked my meat medium, but next to her I felt like a true vegetarian. At the same time, she suddenly developed an aversion to some other smells. For example, strong perfumes or certain spices. She could even wrinkle her nose if someone passed by with strong cologne. When I jokingly asked about her family traditions, she gave a strange smile, replying that her family really cherishes their roots and loves spending time at their country house surrounded by forest. We often hold big family gatherings there, especially on special days, she said vaguely without revealing details. At that moment it seemed cute to me, as I imagined an ordinary American family who loves barbecues and summer gatherings outdoors. But something in her gaze when she said country house made me wary again. Maybe it was just a play of light in her pupils, but I suddenly thought they had strangely narrowed, almost in a beast-like way. Of course it seemed absurd, and I dismissed such thoughts. After all, I was too enamored with her to worry seriously. Yet, the anxiety continued to grow unnoticed, like a thin but strong thread winding around my mind, making itself known only at the most unexpected moments. One evening, when we were sitting in a small Italian diner on the outskirts of town, Anna suggested spending the upcoming weekend at her country house. She said it was quiet and peaceful there now, and we both could benefit from a change of scenery, resting from the city's noise. I agreed without hesitation. We were already quite close. Our conversations often turned to personal topics. We joked, made plans, and I felt our relationship was becoming more serious. That same evening, returning home, I suddenly felt a strange unease. Maybe because we had agreed to go somewhere together and to a place that seemed to mean a lot to her. I couldn't explain my anxiety rationally, as everything looked fine on the outside. Even my friends said we were a great match, and Anna herself seemed affectionate and in love. But something was inside, not letting me rest. I was getting ready for bed when I decided to approach the window and look at the city's night lights. I lived in a small house in a fairly quiet neighborhood. The windows of my bedroom looked out onto a modest yard with a few trees and an old lamp post, dimly lighting the pathway. Usually in the evenings I enjoyed the peaceful silence. But that time, pulling back the curtain, I saw down below, under the lamppost, an indistinct dark figure. It took me a couple of seconds to realize it wasn't a trick of the light or my fatigue. Someone was standing on the pathway looking directly at my window. Even through the dimness, I felt that piercing gaze. I froze, trying to make out facial features, but the lamp cast misleading shadows, making the figure appear as a blurred silhouette. My pulse quickened and my throat went dry. I wanted to open the window and shout, "Hey, who are you there?" But something inside stopped me. A moment later, the person, or non-person, took a step back into the darkness, and I saw only the shadow slip past the tree trunk and disappear. I pressed my face against the glass, hoping to see something, but the yard plunged into silence. No one came into the light, and I suddenly felt uneasy. Did I just imagine it? I lay down in bed with a heavy heart. Before falling asleep, thoughts plagued me that maybe I should have called the police or at least told Anna. But she probably wouldn't take seriously my story about a mysterious stranger outside my window. She would likely think I was overreacting and making things up, and I really didn't want to look like a coward in her eyes. In the morning, I woke up feeling exhausted but tried to convince myself that it was just a waking dream or a play of light. Trying not to think about yesterday, I went shopping. I needed to prepare for the trip, pack clothes, groceries, and everything necessary for the weekend. I tried to push away the grim thoughts that the trip to Anna's forest house might be connected to something amiss. After all, it was just a weekend. A romantic outing with my beloved girlfriend. Could anything go wrong? By the evening of the next day, we were already sitting in her car, listening to music and discussing how fun we would have surrounded by nature. I still felt a strange tension, but it mixed with excited anticipation. I still hoped that a couple of days away from the city would help me relax, and the mysterious figure I saw in the yard was gradually fading from memory, replaced by images of carefree relaxation. After a couple of hours of driving, we left the busy highway for a narrow road surrounded by dense trees. Here, the forest became darker and tighter, as if the trees were deliberately blocking the sunlight. Old oaks with crooked branches, stretched twisted fingers, and bushes seemed to try to grasp the car's wheels. Anna drove confidently, as if this place was her home. Finally, we arrived at an old two-story house standing deep within the plot, surrounded by a half-decayed wooden fence. Despite its age, the facade looked neat. The black paint on the walls was relatively fresh. The windows were large with heavy shutters, but when closed, they resembled eyes unwilling to open to the light. In front of the house stretched a small yard with overgrown grass, and beyond that, a semi-dark garden where trees grew so close to each other that through their dense foliage, almost no sunlight pierced through. Entering inside, I was surprised at how spacious the house was. In the central living room stood an antique fireplace made of massive stone blocks. The floor was covered with furs, probably bear or wolf, hard to tell, and I had no desire to find out. The furniture was heavy, made of dark wood, heavy floor vases, and old-fashioned lamps were everywhere. Immediately noticeable were photographs in black and white frames. Some depicted a family dressed in clothes reminiscent of styles from several decades ago. Despite the size of the windows, Almost all of them were tightly covered with dark curtains. Light penetrated only partially, resulting in the room being filled with a strange semi-darkness. This created a tense atmosphere, as if the house itself held some secrets. I couldn't shake the feeling that around every corner there might be something better left unknown. Anna led me to the kitchen, where everything looked slightly more modern. There was a refrigerator, microwave, and even a coffee machine. Nevertheless, even here, semi-darkness prevailed. The round window above the sink was covered with dark fabric. She explained that the house often gets too much sun, and it ruins the furniture. It seemed strange to me that sunlight could be a problem in such a remote place surrounded by trees, but I decided not to ask further questions. While we were unpacking, I noticed another curious detail. There were almost no mirrors in the rooms. Usually in the hallway or bathroom, you can find at least one mirror, but here it was completely absent. When I casually mentioned this, Anna shrugged and replied that there was a mirror, but it was somewhere stored in the pantry because her parents didn't like seeing distortions of reality in them. Whether it was a joke or something else was unclear. Later in the evening, we arranged a small dinner by the fireplace. Anna placed plates with cold cuts and a green salad on the table, poured red wine into glasses. The atmosphere seemed cozy, though somewhat gloomy. I watched the dancing flames, trying not to succumb to inner unease. After all, the day had been long, and a strange silence reigned around. There were no sounds from neighbors, no distant voices, only the occasional creak of wind outside the windows. Before bed, I decided to inspect the second floor. The bedroom where Anna had settled me was spacious, with a large bed. Instead of the usual mirrored wardrobe, there was a dresser with carved doors. The window was also tightly covered with heavy curtains. When I slightly opened them to air the room a bit, I saw the dense darkness of the forest outside. Barely discernible silhouettes of trees moved in the rhythm of the night wind, and through this blackness, not a single ray of moonlight pierced through. I shivered, feeling a primal fear, as if the forest was preparing to engulf me. Drawing the curtains closed, I felt my heart beating a bit faster than usual. But it's just one weekend, I told myself, just an old house, a somewhat scary ambience. Isn't that what people look for when they want thrills? Laying in bed, I tried not to think about the strange figure I saw outside my window in the city, and the unnatural strength that lurked in my beloved. In the morning, the house greeted me with heavy silence. Neither bird songs nor rustling leaves outside the windows, as if nature itself had held its breath. I went downstairs and didn't find Anna in the living room. On the table was a note. Went for a run. Be back soon. Breakfast is in the fridge. Love, Anna. I didn't know she was into running, as I had never heard about it before. But I still decided that running on forest trails in such a place could be quite pleasant. I poured myself some coffee and wandered around the house, examining the interior details. I noticed the photographs again. Some had a young woman who bore a clear resemblance to Anna, probably her mother. Next to her stood a tall man in a hunting suit, presumably the father. His gaze was very serious, even stern. In another photo, there was an entire family by the fireplace in the same living room, but strangely, the faces of several people were slightly blurred, as if someone had jerked sharply during the shoot. By midday, Anna returned looking healthy. I asked how the run was, and she just smiled, showing that everything was fine. Then we went for a short walk around the area. The forest indeed looked gloomy, tall pines and oaks, dark ground with fallen leaves, and rarely piercing sun rays. The air was fresh but somehow tense, and I felt like someone was constantly watching us. However, whenever I turned around, I saw nothing but tree trunks and dense thickets. Returning to the house, we started preparing lunch. Anna again insisted on a meat dish, and I, though I didn't object, began to feel an uncomfortable monotony in her tastes. While cooking, I constantly heard light creaks coming from the corridor or the upstairs rooms. Several times I thought the door at the end of the corridor was slowly opening by itself, although there was no draft. When I peeked into one of the empty rooms, I was struck by how it seemed someone had hurriedly left. The curtain on the window was swaying, as if touched by a hand, and the floorboards continued to creak slightly. In the evening, as twilight began to fall on the forest, the moment came that completely threw me off. We were sitting by the fireplace, chatting about Anna's past life in another state. I heard a distant sound, similar to a wolf's howl. The sound was prolonged and gloomy, and it seemed to come from the direction of the forest. I startled. "Did you hear that? It sounds like a howl." But Anna fell silent, looking at me too intensely. Her face suddenly became tense, as if she was listening. For a moment, her eyes seemed to sparkle in the semi-darkness, and her lips tightened into a thin line. It even seemed to me that her jaw slightly extended. But after a split second, her face returned to its usual expression. "Probably just the wind," she finally said, trying to speak calmly. "There haven't been wolves around here for a long time." However, the internal chill running down my spine indicated that it was hardly just the wind. After this incident, Anna began to diligently change the subject, talking about local attractions and how you could hear all sorts of strange sounds in the city at night, especially when the wind was howling in the alleys. The night passed restlessly. I tossed and turned for a long time, listening to every rustle. I heard the quiet creak of floorboards again, as if someone was walking around the house. A couple of times it seemed like I caught a muffled female whisper, but it was impossible to make out words. I went out into the corridor and listened to the silence, only occasionally broken by my own breathing. At some point, I decided I was hallucinating. Returning to bed, I tried to sleep, but my sleep was restless and full of nightmares. In them, I saw strange shadows and red eyes watching me from under doors. I woke up tired, as if I hadn't rested at all. And ahead of us was another day that, as I didn't suspect then, would only increase my anxiety. The next day, I went downstairs to the kitchen earlier than usual, but didn't find Anna there. On the table was a note. "Jay, I have urgent matters in the nearby town. I'll be back by evening. Rest and make yourself at home. Love, Anna." I reread these lines several times, trying to understand what could have made her leave in a hurry. Maybe family issues or something work-related. She hadn't said anything in advance. She only mentioned that her family often comes here, but there was no mention of any specific matters. I was left alone in the huge house. At first, I decided that perhaps I should spend time usefully. Take a walk in the forest or cook something. But the thought of being here in complete isolation and silence caused a vague unease. The troubling dreams and nightly creaks wouldn't leave my mind. Besides, I felt that there was something in the house that Anna was trying not to tell me about. After having coffee, I took a flashlight. For some reason, I thought I might need it even during the day, and decided to inspect all the rooms. I'll be like in classic horror movies, I thought. The hero who can't stay put and goes into places he shouldn't. But curiosity overcame fear, and deep down, I wanted to unravel the mystery of Anna's house. To calm myself, I started with the corridor, opened a couple of rooms that we hadn't used. In one I found a storage of all sorts of old things. Boxes with books, dishes, old toys. There in the corner stood a dusty dresser, and on it lay a torn curtain as if someone had ripped it off the window. It even seemed to me that it had stains resembling brown spots. Could it be blood? But the color could also be from old wine or sauce. I didn't look closely for too long to avoid heightening my horror. In the next room, resembling an old office, I noticed a large library with worn book spines. Skimming the titles, I saw a couple of folklore collections about Native American myths. It seemed curious that they often mentioned shapeshifters, forest spirits, totem animals. I also came across a book with a French title, something about lycanthropy, werewolfism. A chill ran through me, though I tried to maintain a rational mindset. The third room caught me off guard. The door was slightly open, and I discovered that it was a bedroom, probably a child's. There was a small bed, and against the wall stood dolls and soft toys. There was a thick layer of dust everywhere, as if no one had lived here for a long time. On the table I saw colored pencils and a drawing made by a child. I picked up the sheet. It depicted a girl, resembling Anna in her childhood, and around her a few gray silhouettes that looked like wolves or large dogs. All the animals had bright red eyes. At the bottom, in childlike handwriting, it said, "We are the pack." Something pierced my chest. "Family traditions." Her words came back to me. I sighed and put the drawing back. Perplexed, I wanted to return to the living room and wait for Anna, but something made me continue exploring. I hadn't yet looked into the basement. Maybe there was a wine cellar or some secret passage to the backyard. And then I noticed a strange detail. One of the bookshelves seemed to be moved, leaving a small gap in the wall visible. I approached closer, shone the flashlight on the space behind the shelf, and saw the outlines of a narrow door. It looked as if someone had recently left from there, not fully closing the secret passage. A chill ran down my spine, but curiosity drove me. It's just an old house. There might be a secret pantry or underground passage, I repeated to myself. I cautiously pushed the shelf aside, trying not to make extra noise, and slightly opened the door. A musty smell of dampness and old stone wafted out. I felt my heart beating faster, blood roaring in my ears. In the depth, a narrow stairwell leading downward opened up. Before me was a mystery that, judging by the surroundings, promised to be far more frightening than dusty toys and old books. I had to either close this passage and wait for Anna, pretending that I hadn't noticed anything, or go down and see what was hidden there. I don't know why, but I chose the second option even though fear was already squeezing my chest. Did I want to prove to myself that I had nothing to fear? Or perhaps deep inside, I felt that the solution to all the strange things lay precisely there, in the basement. I stood at the threshold of the secret passage, enveloped in dampness and darkness. My knees trembled, but curiosity overcame fear. The flashlight in my hand illuminated the narrow corridor leading deeper. Somewhere ahead I could make out stone steps descending into what appeared to be the basement. The musty smell of stale air pressed against my temples, and my heart pounded so fiercely that I could barely hear my own breathing. I took the first step, then the second. The creak of the floorboards was left behind as the wooden floor gave way to uneven stone slabs. The walls were damp, darkened by time. Along them hung tarnished torches and old metal hooks, as if this corridor had once been actively used. I moved cautiously forward, trying not to step on the debris of fallen boards and broken ceramics scattered here and there. Soon I felt the edge of a step with my foot, and realized that the staircase went down quite deep. But before descending, The flashlight caught a glimpse of a small cupboard to the left, its entrance covered by a crooked door. I pushed the door, and it gave way with a creak. Inside was a narrow room with a low ceiling and a couple of old shelves against the walls. Cobwebs hung from above, and the air seemed stagnant for centuries. I stepped inside and lit the shelves. There were tattered books, yellowed papers, some boxes. An old camera with a worn leather cover caught my eye, and nearby, a stack of photographs tied with a rubber band. I carefully took the pictures and saw that they were family portraits. In the first one, a family by the fireplace, probably the same one in the living room. In the center stood a woman with curly dark hair next to her, a man with sharp facial features, and around them children. Everyone in the photo was looking directly into the lens, but what bothered me was that their pupils seemed unnaturally elongated, almost like those of wolves. In the second photo, a crowd of people on a lawn near the same house. Smiles, laughter. But upon closer inspection, I noticed that one young man in the frame had strangely elongated fangs. It could have been an optical distortion, but it looked ominous. I flipped through a few more photos and found one depicting a girl eerily similar to Anna in her childhood. She stood on the porch in the same pose as her parents, looking straight into the camera. Even in this blurred black and white portrait, her eyes reflected a mix of childlike innocence and some fierce curiosity. Putting the photographs away, I searched for something else unusual. On the lower shelf, I found a notebook scribbled with indecipherable handwriting and strange symbols. The first readable phrase I could extract from the chaos of lines read, "Full moon. The call of blood." A bit further, "Last night the pack hunted again." Goosebumps ran down my skin. It resembled a diary where someone had recorded the details of a gruesome hunt. I crouched down and noticed another box against the far wall covered with tattered fabric. Removing the cloth, I discovered children's items, picture books, rubber toys, and several drawings. On one of them, something resembling a werewolf was painted with red paint, or something similar, a person with a wolf's head and claws under the moon. Below, in uneven letters, "Our home in the forest. We are a family." It seemed Anna, or someone from her family, had been raised around such images from an early age. I froze with the drawing in my hands, feeling that a part of the horrifying truth had been unveiled to me. Everything happening around, her sudden reactions, avoidance of mirrors, strange hints about traditions, now formed a sinister mosaic. But ahead was still the descent deeper into the basement, and I already understood that what I would see there would utterly shatter my consciousness. Before leaving the cupboard, I glanced once more at the diary entries. I wanted to believe that it was all fiction or folklore, but the phrases read, there spoke of something real and terrible. Clutching the notebook to my chest, I cautiously returned to the corridor and began to descend the stone steps. The steps were narrow and steep, and I felt the dampness intensify with each step. At the bottom awaited a massive wooden door with a heavy metal latch. A chill ran down my arms at the touch of the latch, as if the door held some malevolent memory. I slightly opened it a couple of inches and peeked inside, a dark room emanating a musty smell of death. After a moment, I swung the door open wider and shone the flashlight on what lay within. At first, I saw walls with rusty chains attached to them. The air carried a faint metallic tang. Taking a few steps forward, I stumbled upon something under my feet. I lifted the flashlight and froze in horror. Scattered bones lay on the floor. Human bones. Their shape and size left no doubt. Some were partially gnawed, and nearby lay remnants of clothing, long decayed. I involuntarily recoiled, pressing my hand to my mouth to stifle a wave of nausea. Further along the walls were marks of scratched furrows, as if someone in desperation had tried to break free from shackles, clawing at the stone with nails or claws. Dark stains resembling old, dried blood were visible on the floor in places. I tread carefully, feeling my heart race in my chest and my throat tighten with fear. Deep in the basement, there was something like a table or workbench where rusty tools lay, either for hunting or for torture. I couldn't say for sure, as my head was buzzing with a real roar. There I noticed several sheets of paper smeared with dried blood. Upon closer inspection, they were scraps of notes. Brought another guest. Did not survive the transformation. The blood was too weak. The call of the moon stronger than any will. It all sounded like the records of a horrific ritual, and now I had no doubt. People who came to this house became victims of wild, beastly creatures who, it seemed, were Anna's kin. Somewhere in the distance, chains clinked as if touched by a slight draft. Panic rose within me. What if someone else is here, hiding in the shadows? I couldn't stay in this hell for a minute. But at that moment, as I decided to turn back, I caught sight of an old bag abandoned by the wall. I knelt down and opened it. Inside were someone's personal belongings, a wallet with a driver's license, a toothbrush, a couple of photographs. The ID bore the name and photo of a middle-aged man, clearly not from Anna's family. My heart skipped a beat. Everything indicated that he, too, had been a guest. Goosebumps ran all over my body, and I realized I needed to run immediately. But a thought raced through my mind. What if Anna is also involved in these murders? I didn't want to believe it. For a moment, I closed my eyes, trying to calm the tremor, and then decisively slipped out of the basement, slamming the door shut behind me. I returned to the corridor and stood there, utterly bewildered, not knowing what to do next. Staying in the house meant exposing myself to mortal danger. Running? But where, since I was stuck here without a car, and the forest could be just as dangerous? Moreover, Anna could return at any moment. My head was spinning with fear, and my breathing became erratic. It was time to make a decision, but my legs felt like they were rooted to the floor. I decided I had to get out of here by any means. But barely had I returned to the staircase, intending to climb to the first floor, when I suddenly heard the front door slam somewhere upstairs. "Anna is back!" I mentally screamed. Seconds stretched out, my heart raced, and my mind feverishly searched for an exit. Hide in the basement. But I wouldn't survive there if she decided to come down. Climb up and pretend everything was fine? Perhaps that was the only chance. I quickly shoved the shelf back into place, covering the secret passage, and rushed to the door of the room where it all began. Did I manage to erase the traces of my curiosity? Like an arrow, I shot up the stairs and darted into the living room. While running, I tried to calm my breathing. I needed to appear relaxed, but my legs were shaking, and my forehead was covered in sweat. In the living room, Anna was already waiting for me. She stood by the fireplace in the glow of the dim light, smiling, but her gaze was tense, like that of a predator ready to pounce. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Hi," I said, trying to speak as casually as possible. "How was the trip?" She responded neutrally, without going into details. She asked what I had been doing. I shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant. "Not much. Just walked around the house, read some books, looked for something interesting. There are so many old things here. It's a bit creepy." She squinted slightly. It seemed she sensed my lie, as she had lived here since childhood and knew perfectly well what secrets lay within. Perhaps she suspected that I might stumble upon things not meant for outsiders' eyes. Or maybe she knew for sure that I had already seen everything. To avoid direct questions, I suggested, "Let's cook dinner together. Then we can watch a movie or just talk. After all, we came here to relax." "Sounds great," she replied with a smile that seemed a bit strained to me. "I'll just change and come to the kitchen." When she disappeared behind the door, I felt my heart nearly jump out of my chest. I needed time to gather my thoughts. Fragments of words from the diary, images of Bones' rusty chains swirled in my head. The fate of those who had come here before me was sealed. Could the same fate await me? In the kitchen, I mechanically started cooking, reheating the leftovers from yesterday's steak and chopping vegetables. Soon, Anna joined me. She looked as if nothing was wrong. She smiled, talked about how beautiful the night road was, how the air in the forest was amazing. However, something cautious flickered in her gaze, as if she was expecting some confession or sensing my fear. I had to force the most charming smile to hide my panic. Dinner passed in tense silence. We neither hurried to ask questions. Instead of conversations, we listened to the crackling of the logs in the fireplace and the quiet howl of the wind outside the windows. I was already pondering how to slip away from the house when I noticed. Anna was intently looking into me, as if sniffing the scent of fear. Surely she suspected something. As soon as the clock on the wall struck 9, she suddenly said quietly, "Tonight is a special night. Maybe we should go for a walk. The moon should be almost full, and the forest will look mesmerizing." I swallowed hard, realizing that this walk could turn into something more terrifying than a romantic stroll under the moon. I had to think of a way to avoid being trapped. But I nodded in response, trying to maintain my composure. I suspected that the real danger would come tonight. Night fell on the forest swiftly, as if someone had turned off the fading daylight. The risen moon, almost full, peeked out from behind the treetops, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Anna threw on a light jacket but walked confidently, as if the frosty air didn't affect her. I, on the other hand, shivered, twitching my shoulders in the cold. We walked quite far from the house, delving into the thicket. Tall trunks closed overhead, allowing only pale moonlight to pierce through, making everything around appear ghostly. I felt adrenaline surging and fear tightening my throat. Why did she lead me here so far? I asked myself, and at the same time I knew the answer. Suddenly, Anna stopped and turned to me. The moonlight illuminated her face, and I saw a harsh, almost beastly gleam in her eyes. A tense smile played on her lips. "Jay," she whispered softly, "you've already seen what's hidden in the basement." I froze. It meant my attempts to pretend ignorance had failed. Before I could respond, her voice sounded low, almost growling. "I can feel your fear. Do you understand who I am?" My heart nearly stopped. The words stuck in my throat, but I managed to squeeze out, I didn't mean to meddle in others' affairs. I was just scared." She suddenly burst into a quiet, joyless laugh. There was no trace of humanity in that laugh. Then I noticed her breathing quicken, her shoulders starting to twitch. It was as if she was battling a strong internal pain or holding back some immense effort. "Now, night. When blood boils the strongest," she hissed through clenched teeth. "I wanted to give you a chance, but you discovered everything yourself. And now there's no choice, neither for you nor for me." Before I could comprehend what was happening, her face began to morph before my eyes. Her jaw elongated, her skin tightened, and her hands— no, not hands anymore, but limbs with sharp claws. I recoiled in disbelief, watching as Anna's body took on the shape of a wolf while retaining horrifying human features. Her eyes flashed yellow and a guttural roar escaped her chest. A wolf's muzzle twisted into a snarl, revealing long fangs. Maintaining the last remnants of sanity, I turned and started to run. Adrenaline pushed me forward as a terrifying howl echoed behind me. Branches whipped harshly against my face. My legs tripped over tree roots. But I sprinted through the forest, losing all sense of direction. It felt like my heart would leap out of my chest. Hearing something crash loudly through the bushes behind me, I realized that the transformed Anna was already chasing me. I spotted a small structure to my right, either an old shed or a hunting cabin. I darted towards it and dashed inside, slamming the crooked door shut behind me. I reached out in the darkness and grabbed something, a shovel or an iron rod. Outside, a powerful blow shook the door, making it tremble as if the creature was battering it with its paws or shoulder. I closed my eyes for a moment. What to do? The werewolf was clearly stronger than any latch, but maybe I had a chance to hold it off. The weapon in my hands was barely effective, but I couldn't give up. Only one thing was clear. That night, either I would find a way to survive, or become another victim of the monstrous family once written about in those eerie diaries. The blows outside grew stronger, as if the enraged beast was smashing the door with its paws or shoulder. The old boards creaked, threatening to break at any moment. I frantically looked around in the dim light, a narrow shed without windows. Only one door, a few rusty tools. Between the beams on the roof hung ancient cobwebs, and the air was filled with the smell of old wood and mold. Not the most suitable refuge, but I had no other way. With a loud crack, the door gave way and cold night air rushed in. I jumped back into a far corner holding the iron rod. On the doorstep appeared a beastly figure, a human silhouette covered in dark fur, with a wolf's muzzle and glowing yellow eyes. Its muzzle twisted into a snarl, and a guttural roar mixed with a sinister laughing sound echoed through the room. I suddenly realized that something human still flickered in the beast's eyes, perhaps a fragment of Anna's consciousness. But her humanoid self had clearly given way to a bloodthirsty predator. The werewolf lunged at me with unexpected speed. I managed to dodge, but its claws scraped my shoulder, tearing my shirt and leaving bloody streaks on my skin. The pain seared my consciousness, but I let out a desperate scream and swung the rod with all my might. It hit the side, and the creature howled, staggering but quickly regaining its balance and making another attack. It was clear I wouldn't last long. Their strength far exceeded mine by many folds. Gathering the last bits of courage, I decided on a bold move. Instead of retreating, I stepped forward and drove the rod into the werewolf's chest. It roared in pain, shook its head, but almost immediately recoiled, dripping a dark, viscous liquid onto the floor. Without wasting time, I fled the shed, frantically slamming the door shut. I knew it was only temporary. The werewolf was wounded, but surely capable of continuing the chase. I needed to reach the car, at least to try. But the car was still at the house, and I didn't even know where the keys were. Maybe Anna had left them. In a state of frantic panic, I raced back along the path, trying to navigate through the darkness. Behind me, the roar and rustle of bushes sounded again. The beast was relentless. I saw it flicker among the trees, moving much faster than I could. My heart raced, my lungs burned from lack of air, but I pushed myself forward, knowing that any hesitation meant death. Soon, I saw the dark silhouette of the house. The shutters were closed, and from inside it seemed no light source was burning. Maybe Anna had left the door ajar herself, luring me inside like a wolf, setting a trap for its prey. Nevertheless, there was no choice. I entered the dim corridor, clutching my bloodied shoulder. Every movement echoed with burning pain. Footsteps reverberated with an echo in the empty rooms. And then I realized that the only chance to survive was to lock the werewolf, as in those terrifying diary entries, and run away, even if it meant crossing the night forest on foot. Through the corner of my eye, I noticed that moonlight was seeping through the thick curtains in the living room. Everything around, as if in slow motion, seemed bathed in a gray shimmer. And I knew if I didn't make it, I would share the fate of those unfortunate souls whose bones rested in the basement. Struggling to hold back the pain and panic, I slammed the door leading to the corridor shut and wedged it with a heavy carved dresser. Outside, the beast let out another howl. Inside the house, a powerful roar shook the walls, making them tremble. It felt as though the house itself was alive and breathing this nightmare. I darted around the rooms in search of something to hold off the werewolf. Any bolts or heavy furniture, but almost everything was either unsuitable or not sturdy enough. Every second could be my last. When I reached the living room, the weak moonlight illuminated the figure in the doorway. The werewolf burst in, its fur bristled. Thick liquid resembling black blood oozed from the wound on its side. It snarled, emitting a low growl full of hatred. Desperately, I grabbed the first object I could find, a heavy candlestick, and threw it at the beast. It recoiled, growling angrily. I had only a fraction of a second to run to the exit, but it suddenly lunged straight at me, knocking me off my feet. I fell, my back hitting the stone floor. A raspy groan escaped my chest, and my eyes dimmed for a moment. In the next instant, I saw a beastly muzzle just inches from my face. The smell of wolf's saliva and blood stung my nostrils. Maybe adrenaline, or perhaps remnants of desperation, gave me strength. I kicked hard, trying to push the werewolf away. The creature howled and recoiled. Taking advantage of the pause, I rolled over and grabbed a piece of broken furniture resembling a sharp stick. Then came pure instinct. I plunged it where the creature's heart should be. An inhuman howl filled the living room as the werewolf shrieked, convulsed with agony, and collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain. I pressed myself against the wall, not taking my eyes off the beast. Suddenly, with a creepy crunch, its fur began to disappear, its paws compressing until before me stood a wounded human figure. It was Anna, a piece of wood protruding from her chest. She looked at me with eyes full of horror and pain, from which the bestial essence had almost faded. Opening her mouth, she took a convulsive breath, as if trying to say something but only exhaled bloody foam. Her hand reached out to me and then fell limply. I stood there, gasping from shock, watching as life left her body. At night, silence descends especially quickly. A moment later, it seemed unbearably quiet in the house. I collapsed to my knees beside the girl's body, in whom just an hour ago I had seen my beloved. Now I saw the embodiment of evil and the victim of a terrible curse simultaneously. The adrenaline slowly faded, giving way to all-consuming horror and the realization of what I had done. Still trembling, I knew I had to run as soon as possible. But as soon as I stood up, I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder where she had scratched me with her claws. I pressed my palm against the wound and felt it burn, as if infected by some primal hot force. "It's just a scratch," I tried to reassure myself. But deep in my consciousness, a chilling suspicion took root. The bites and scratches of a werewolf often carry a curse. Numb, I managed to get outside. The moon was still shining over the forest, indifferent to everything that had happened. Finding the keys in my pocket, apparently Anna had left them in the bedroom, and I had grabbed them by feel in my haste. I dashed to the old sedan parked behind the house. The engine didn't start right away, but when I pressed the gas pedal, I felt a dreadful relief. The car sped onto the dark road, and I tore my gaze away from the rear view mirror for just a second. There, in the moonlight, I saw a dark figure on the porch of the house. Either a hallucination or another member of the family standing there, watching me depart. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. But I wasn't going to go back to check. I was driving away, not knowing what would happen next. My heart was torn by contradictions. Grief and fear mingled. My mind tried to justify what I had done. The main thing was to get out of here and find help before it was too late. However, the dull pain in my shoulder kept intensifying, and suddenly I tasted an unusual metallic tang in my mouth. And then I realized the story was far from over. The shadow of the werewolf's curse was already reaching out its claws to me, and escaping it wouldn't be easy, even on America's endless highways.